Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to M&L Advantages webinar today with Heritage NL. I'd like to thank Executive Director Jerry Dick for joining us this morning. Jerry, thanks for coming online and supporting municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador. Jerry will certainly introduce himself in more detail momentarily, but before we get things underway, just a couple of housekeeping items. We do anticipate this presentation to be approximately 30 minutes. It might run a little bit longer than that. We have a Q&A session teed up for the end of the call where you can submit questions in the chat function of the Zoom app. You can also email questions to bpower@municipalnl.ca, or you can text 709-763-4686. And I guess it's probably wise for me to introduce myself before I continue on. I'm Brad Power, the Director of Programs with Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador. Many of you will certainly know me from my participation on these webinars and my work at M&L, but also I've been a municipal councillor myself for about 10 years. So great to see everyone on the call this morning. It looks as though this might be one of our most well-attended webinars thus far. The Zoom app that you're using this morning has all kinds of features to help you participate better. So feel free to play around with the screen views and the various functions that are available to you. If you can't see the menu, just move your mouse to the bottom of your screen or click on the screen on your tablet and you'll see the menu options come up. After this webinar, we kindly ask that you complete M&L's webinar satisfaction survey. It'll just take 2 minutes of your time, but it will be extremely important for us moving forward in the post-COVID world and making a plan for delivering key information like you'll see here today. So without any further delay, I will hand things over to Jerry. And Jerry, thanks for joining us and welcome.
Good morning, folks, and thanks to Brad and Municipalities NL for the opportunity to do this webinar with you today. Starting out, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about Heritage NL. We're a provincial government agency with a mandate to raise awareness about and conserve the province's built heritage and historic places, and also to safeguard its intangible cultural heritage. And we do that in a number of ways. We have designation programs for both historic structures and heritage districts. We have funding programs to support conservation, and we provide technical advice on a broad range of, or technical support on a broad range of things, from building conservation, community cultural mapping, doing oral history projects, adaptive reuse, among others. And at the end, I'll have our website up, and I'd encourage you to go to our website and see what other programs we have. So probably most of you saw the one pager that we sent out, which we're trying to encourage communities to think about heritage initiatives as part of their post-COVID community renewal strategy. I have to be honest, I don't have a lot of information about the community adjustment programs that might be coming out. We're hearing conversation kind of in the background that there's planning work going on. Right now, I think government's focus has been to support Canadians through this very difficult time. But there are conversations about what comes next in terms of helping communities to get back on their feet. A couple of things we've heard is that government will be looking for shovel-ready projects, which means that planning work is already done. Another is, and I can't confirm this, is that the funders may consider foregoing the community investment of any particular project, so which is typically 10%. So recognizing that a lot of communities and not-for-profit groups are really experiencing tough times financially, they may forego that portion. So, you know, there may never be a better time to roll out community heritage projects than now. So you know what the impacts are right now on your communities better than I do. Of course, there's loss of income and employment for many. A lot of businesses are closed, and questions in terms of how are they going to get back on their feet when this is over. A lot of uncertainty about what the future's going to bring. the COVID-19, it's been a major disruptor in terms of the way we do business, and how are people going to buy, spend, travel in the future? These are questions we really don't have the answer to. It's also a time of social isolation for many, particularly for seniors. But there are some, I think there's some positive things about this as well. And one of the interesting things we're seeing is a reliance on some of the traditional knowledge and skills. So people are, you've heard that people are going back to bread making. You can't buy flour or yeast in the grocery store. I think a lot of people are thinking about putting in a garden. Many people are doing crafts in this period. So it was interesting. I saw a piece on CBC about an historic mill in England. It was part of a museum, and they milled a little bit of grain as part of the demonstration and to sell in the local shop. But now they're being approached to actually mill on a more regular basis. So it is interesting how we often look back to the past in terms of how do we survive some of these more challenging times. The other thing, and I think personally, is that this has given me more time to think about, what it is that I value, how might I want to change things in the future, and that really gets me into kind of three messages that I want to share with you today. And the first is that we need to plan our future rather than letting events carry us along. And I'm going to expand on all of these points in my presentation. The other point I want to make is that heritage resources are some of the most valuable assets that I think a community has in terms of economic renewal and community resilience. And then I'm going to finish up by talking about how Heritage NL can support you in planning for heritage initiatives that might be part of a post-COVID community strategy. So the first point is that we need to plan our future rather than letting events carry us along. As communities, we can either react to the issues and challenges that face us, or we can plan for the kind of future that we want. It seems to me that in this province, for much of our history, we've been in survival mode, get us through to next spring. And that's fine for survival, but it doesn't allow us as communities to thrive, and it generally results in a continual crisis management. Creating effective long-term community development strategies with good community buy-in allows a community to take charge of its future. And of course, any plans have to be living, flexible documents, as we know from the current COVID situation. A crisis comes our way and we have to sometimes change course, or maybe we've lost a major employer in our community. Something I often say is if I was sitting in a COA office and I'm looking at two proposals, and one has a good solid plan, it's part of a larger community development initiative, and the other is a one-off project, I know which one I'm probably going to recommend. So I want to get into now about why you might consider heritage projects. Your community's heritage represents what is unique about your community, something that differentiates it from other communities and gives it a particular image. We could even say a brand or a competitive edge. So think about some communities in the province. Elliston is the root cellar capital of the world. Tilting is known for its traditional stages, stores, and houses. And Port Union, of course, is the union town that Coker built. These are all things that your community can build on, not only for tourism development, but also in terms of reinforcing and building community pride and identity. Another reason to consider a heritage project as part of a community renewal strategy is that it's a great way to put people to work. Adaptive reuse of existing buildings and heritage structures creates more employment than new construction. Something like 60 or 70% of adaptive reuse is labor versus materials. So in new construction, it's roughly 50-50. And when we consider that many of our building materials are imported, that becomes even more important for local employment when we consider adaptive reuse. So, think about what are some of the older structures in your communities, former churches, schools, lodges, commercial buildings, among others. What uses could you put them to in terms of meeting community, cultural or social needs, or are there economic development opportunities? And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the public-private partnerships or social enterprise, which can be part of the adaptive reuse. Restoration projects also can build and enhance local job skills, particularly when combined with training programs. Adaptive reuse projects can help build the skills of people in existing construction trades. In the last fall, we did a workshop on restoring historic windows or wooden windows, which kind of gave another sideline for a number of existing carpenters. We've been through a hard winter on top of the current situation, and that's created economic uncertainty for many. There's a question as to whether or not we're even going to have a tourism season this year, and people have, as we know, been confined to their houses for weeks and maybe even months on end. So revitalizing an underutilized, even a derelict heritage property, I think can be a good way to rally a community around a particular project and to demonstrate positive change. And if ever we needed a boost in our community, it's certainly now. I showed this picture of the Garrick Theater in Bonavista, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it later. Which is a real showpiece in the community and was an historic cinema in the community. Another reason to consider heritage projects is that they can support long-term community development strategies. So attracting new residents, tourism development, spurring private investment. And the community of Bonavista is probably one of the best examples in this province of a community that used their heritage assets as the cornerstone of their community development strategy after the 1992 COD moratorium. Sorry, I should go back. Can we go back to the last slide? Yeah. So initiatives to do up heritage buildings. They undertook community beautification and upgrades to public infrastructure. They created community amenities such as a restored Garrick Theater. And a lot of these projects then set the stage for private investment and the communities actually experienced in-migration over the last number of years. Certainly not every community has the heritage assets of Bonavista, but every community has heritage resources that can support community development. And increasingly, we think of adaptive reuse of existing heritage structures in the fight against climate change. Okay, we can go to the next slide there. Good. So think about the energy and the greenhouse gases that were expended to build a building, to make a brick, to transport that brick to the site, to construct the building. And then when we tear that building down, think about the additional greenhouse gases that are expended to tear it down. Think about the impact on landfill. It's said that up to 30% of our landfill is building waste. So here's an image of the Grace Hospital that was torn down a number of years ago. I remember that it was a very solid building and there was great effort, and all of that presumably went for fill somewhere. And then if we think about the the additional greenhouse gases that are expended to replace a building if it's being replaced. So through adaptive reuse, we preserve all of that embodied energy, and we keep a lot of building waste out of landfill. So now I want to share with you some thoughts about if you're going to undertake heritage initiatives, what government might be looking for in terms of proposals. Shovel ready, as I mentioned before, that means that the planning and the feasibility work is already done, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Of course, what's the job creation or the economic impact, not just in terms of short term, but also long term? What is the ability of a project to leverage additional community or economic benefit, for example, to support business development? And I talked about the case of Buena Vista. The other thing that's really important is how does any particular project fit within a larger development plan for a community or a region? I think the landscape of this province is littered with one-off projects that really had little long-lasting impact. So how does a current project build on what's already been done? Is it part of an incremental plan to support long-term strategies for enhancing the community or supporting economic development? So I use the example of Buena Vista, where they've managed through a number of incremental projects to attract millions of dollars to do public upgrades in the community. It's probably many of you are aware of the destination management organizations. There are 5 in the province, and I think it's important that projects fit within larger regional strategies. That's certainly something that funders will consider in looking at proposals. Another thing is that the focus of government is increasingly going towards experiential tourism, if tourism is the focus of your project. Government has created a lot of cultural infrastructure, heritage tourism infrastructure, and the focus now is how do we create meaningful experiences that will keep people in the community for a long time. You know, the old kind of adage is, well, you build a museum and people will come. I don't think that holds true anymore unless that facility has hands-on experiences for visitors. And just if you want to get more information about that, go to the province's Creating Experiences Toolkit, which you can get on the Department of Tourism, Culture, Industry, and Innovation website. Another thing, of course, will be the financial viability. We've seen a number of projects and ones that the Heritage Foundation has funded in the past where there wasn't really a financial or a strong business case for that project. So 20 years down the road, initially money was put into it. 20 years down the road, the roof is leaking, and there doesn't seem to be a revenue stream to keep the lights on and to keep the building properly maintained, or any other infrastructure. It could be trails or what have you. So, and even if a project isn't going to be a moneymaker on its own, is it of value to someone else, like i.e. local business operators, that maybe they or the municipality will support it? And I'm going to now talk about a few kind of examples of heritage initiatives, starting out with the Heritage Adaptive Reuse projects, and talk about a couple of different models. So this is the Port Union Saltfish Plant, which is a very large building. As some of you may have seen, it was in a real state of decay. And so the Coker Foundation partnered with an iceberg water bottling company to do a total rehabilitation of the restoration of this building, and the company has a long-term lease. And so I understand the way this worked is the company paid its its lease up front, which then was the funding that the group leveraged to get additional public dollars to fix up this building. Next slide is the Heart's Content Heritage Center, which was an historic United Church that had been deconsecrated. So with support from Heritage NL, ACOA, TCII, they restored the building and and they are currently operating as an arts center. Another adaptive reuse project that's underway is the Gander International Lounge. It's probably the last of 1950s era airport lounges. It's an incredibly beautiful structure, and currently the airport authority is adaptively reusing this space for community use. Another kind of initiative that you might consider is doing public improvements, community beautification. Bonavista has done a number of different projects. One of the earliest ones was the upgrading of Church Street, which has a number of the older businesses, historic structures on it, residential buildings, churches. They spruced up the sidewalks, they built fences, which kind of nicely tie the whole thing together. They've also done some waterfront development, again, creating assets not only for tourists, but also for local residents. Another example, Carboneer has done a downtown revitalization concept that was undertaken by Tract Consulting to undertake a very significant upgrading of their historic downtown area. And again, I think the idea is, we want to bring people back downtown. We want to give the private sector a reason to invest in their businesses. Another project that you might consider, so a number of heritage tourism attractions are really questioning whether they're going to be able to open this year, that even with a limited local tourism, is there going to be enough business to operate? So one of the things that some communities or organizations might consider is using this kind of gap year to upgrade the infrastructure. So Battle Harbor Historic Trust has developed a scenario whereby they would hire all of their staff back for the summer, and they would undertake upgrades, some restoration and maintenance work to have their facility in tip-top condition. They're hoping to take advantage of the 75% wage subsidy to cover a significant part of the cost, and hopefully to access other government funding that might be available to them to cover the cost of materials and the like. So that's something that some organizations could consider. Another kind of project, I mean, these projects don't all necessarily need to be bricks and mortar, kind of infrastructure. They could also be community heritage inventories, oral history projects that can set the stage for other things. So I have a couple of examples here. One is we did a project with the community of New Perlican. It was a cultural mapping exercise or workshop. And one of the things I identified was that goats were a big part of the community in the past. So they did a booklet. They've done several printings of this already, and it generates revenue for the local heritage group. A few years ago, we did an inventory of the Heart's Content Heritage District, and this can set the stage for heritage protection strategies and development strategies. And things they could do with this would be publications, walking tours, community history guides. And to one of the things we can do to support you is to do planning work and keep, these projects are most successful when they have a good tight focus. So as I said before, to have the best chance of accessing funding, any group or community needs to have its ducks all lined up in terms of planning and the demonstration of viability. And we can help in a number of ways. The first being to identify opportunities. So we have a workshop called People, Places, and Culture, which helps a community to map out their tangible and intangible cultural heritage assets, and then to start to identify ways that it can preserve those assets, and also what are some of the development opportunities. These workshops are probably going to be a bit difficult to do with self-isolation, but maybe we can be creative with using online tools. So one of the ways that we can help, if you have a vacant or underutilized building, you want to identify a new use for it, we could help you with the community engagement process. For example, doing maybe community surveys, focus group sessions, case studies, we can help you to look at what some of the options might be. An example of this, we worked with the community of Harbor Grace to do a public engagement process for the historic Immaculate Conception Church, which had been deconsecrated. So we did an online survey, we did a couple of focus groups, and identified a number of different potential uses, and we put this together in the form of a report which went to the Archdiocese. These kind of project or engagement processes work best when there's an engagement of the key stakeholders, both inside and outside the community. So I think of like destination management organizations, business development corporations, municipal councils, the local business community, funding agencies. It's good to have them all at the table. And as I said, Heritage NL can also provide some case studies on projects, similar kinds of projects elsewhere in the world. So once you have some ideas of how you could adaptively reuse your building, you need to sort out the wheat from the chaff. And that really requires an examination of the financial feasibility of any particular project. This often requires the involvement of professional consultants, but for kind of a quick and dirty analysis, Heritage NL may be able to help you. Last year, we did a feasibility study on adaptive reuse of a 1920s, a very little post office in the community of Hants Harbor, which was being passed over to the local Heritage Society. And what came out of this was an idea of actually renovating it as an Airbnb, a little rental cottage, which would then operate as a social enterprise that could support the work of the local Heritage Society. And so we did 3 different scenarios, and here was the analysis for a vacation rental. Another thing we can do is offer technical help on heritage conservation projects and inventories, oral histories. We've got a fair bit of knowledge on preserving and restoring historic buildings, and if we don't know, we'll try and advise you on who can help. And this includes getting the right professional for the job. If you have, say, a local heritage masonry building, the local engineer might not have the expertise to properly deal with that kind of building. So, and the other thing we can do is advise you or even offer training on successful heritage inventory or oral history projects. We can also help to steer you in the right direction in terms of funding sources and innovative models for managing heritage initiatives. Here's the website. If you have any questions, if you want to explore a project, please get in touch with me. I'm in my office. I have lots of time these days. So I don't know whether we have any questions or time for.
Thanks, Jerry. That's some excellent information. Folks, just a reminder, if you have questions for Jerry, you can type them in the chat function within the Zoom app. You can also email me at bpower@municipalnl.ca, or you can text 709-763-4686. Jerry, just while we're waiting to see if any questions come in, I'm going to read out a couple of comments that were typed in the chat function. This one from Jane Severs. It says, in my opinion, if the current crisis has shown us anything, it's that heritage development needs to be rationalized based on consideration in addition to or instead of tourism, and in particular, non-resident tourism. Consideration should start with community benefits first, then resident tourism, then non-resident tourism. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I'm a big believer that communities do heritage, they preserve the heritage first and foremost for themselves in terms of creating a better place to live, supporting community identity and pride. And I think if we do that well, tourists are naturally going to want to come and visit. But that's not to say that tourism necessarily has to be or should be part of the strategy for every community.
Absolutely. The other comment comes from Mark Lambswood. He said that they got the People Places Culture Workshop in Deer Lake in just before the COVID-19 wave arrived. He was very thankful to Heritage NL for that. He said, we're excited about next steps in the Deer Lake pocket. Snowmageddon forced Jerry and Dale to reschedule earlier in 2020, but we're thankful that we got your visit in just prior to COVID, and we had a great turnout in Deer Lake, and they'll certainly be in touch. So a great commendation for the great work you're doing, Jerry, and the work of Heritage NL. So I don't see any additional questions coming in. So I really appreciate Jerry's time today, and thank you all for joining. This was certainly one of our most well-attended webinars thus far. We had almost 51 participants throughout the session. Big thank you to Jerry for his presentation. Always informative and helpful, no matter what comes from Heritage NL. And I've had certainly a personal connection to you guys for the last couple of years, and everywhere we go and everything we do, it resounds very well, and our communities are very appreciative of that. We're certainly looking forward at Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador to continue working with Heritage NL. Some great work we can accomplish together, and of course, economic development being such a big driver for the recovery to COVID. Any opportunity we can pursue, that's where our head should be. We should be looking at these things. So just a reminder, the presentation from today and the video will be posted on the MNL website in the very near future. Anyone that did miss the session, if you hear from someone, just encourage them over the next day or two to go and register as you did, and they can watch the video on demand. But in addition to that, we will have it posted on our website for long-term archiving as well. Just one last reminder of our webinar satisfaction survey. It'll only take you 2 minutes to fill it out, and it's a really important piece to help MNL tailor its training and presentations for the future. So thank you again for joining us. This has been a presentation of MNL Advantage, MNL's membership services program. We thank you very much for your time today, and be safe, wash your hands, and we'll chat again soon. Take care.